Romance has a way of finding its way onto the menu at Forepaugh, an upscale French restaurant in the resurgent neighborhood of Irvine Park in St. Paul, Minnesota. It is considered one of the most romantic restaurants in the city, revered for both its atmosphere and its cuisine. It seems as if it were always so, as if this mansion were always a setting for love, or at the very least for lust. And while romance is often idealized and stylized, rarely is it so picturesque or idyllic in practice. Love can turn ugly when the highs of ecstasy have faded and yielded to the lows of reality. Here, then, is the arc along which Joseph Forepaugh traced his path. In doing so, he contributed to a legacy that makes its presence felt even today. Forepaugh's was named for Joseph Librant Forepaugh, a senior partner in the firm of J.L. Forepaugh and Company. Forepaugh had found great success in establishing the first exclusively wholesale dry goods house in the state and the largest in the Northwest. In 1870, he acquired 5 lots in the Irvine Park neighborhood, whose residents included important figures such as Alexander Ramsey, Minnesota's first territorial governor. Constructed and centered upon these lots was the Forepaugh Mansion, a glorious Victorian-style tribute to wealth. The structure was surrounded on all sides by manicured lawns and gardens and was decorated within with the finest furnishings Forepaugh could find. The grandest display, of course, was the Forepaugh family itself, with its self-made patriarch, doting wife, and 2 beautiful daughters. The Forepaughs were the very picture of the American dream, and their home its architectural embodiment. Of course, dreams are rooted not in reality, but in fantasy. All was not right in the Forepaugh home. The family lived in the home for 16 years until abruptly departing for Europe, their mansion sold to General John Henry Hammond. Their departure aroused curiosity, for not long before they left, one of the Forepaugh servants, a young maid named Molly, had hanged herself in the 3rd-floor bedroom. While the Forepaughs sought to keep the suicide a secret, pedestrians walked by the home had seen Molly twisting and turning, displayed as she was behind the 3rd-floor bedroom window. Molly's death was undeniably public knowledge. People all found themselves preoccupied with one question: why did Molly kill herself? The Forepaughs may have escaped the prying eyes and the whispered suspicions, but they could not escape the truth. Forepaugh had visited despair upon his young servant. The 2 of them had fallen in love, but when Forepaugh learned Molly was pregnant, he abandoned her and told her to leave his home. Understandably, Forepaugh could smell scandal and was desperate to avoid its taint. He distanced himself from the servant, refusing to listen to her pleas. Desperate, confused, and alone, Molly spoke out in the only way she could. Her suicide was the only way to stain Forepaugh's silence. The Forepaughs returned to Minnesota in 1889. They returned to St. Paul and built a new home at 302 Summit Avenue, a perch from where they could look down upon both the city and their old home. 3 years later, on July 8, 1892, Forepaugh took a walk to Irvine Park, put a gun to his head, and shot himself dead. Forepaugh, so cavalier and careless in his treatment of Molly, met her fate, plagued as she had been by an overwhelming depression from which the only escape could be death. It's said that Forepaugh had convinced himself that his finances were crumbling, but when lawyers analyzed Forepaugh's estate upon his death, they found that his finances were in good shape. In addition to his numerous real estate holdings, he had $500,000 in other assets, a monstrous sum at the time. Perhaps Forepaugh's suicide was motivated not by greed, but by the haunting memory of a young girl named Molly. The original Forepaugh homestead went through a succession of owners, and the Housing and Redevelopment Authority finally took ownership and closed its doors. The fortunes of Irvine Park had turned. Once an exclusive residential neighborhood, it had fallen far from grace. The house remained unoccupied until 1974, when Nagel Restaurants No Limit Incorporated purchased the property and began renovations to turn this once stately manor into a restaurant. Workers began to notice strange activity throughout the house. Matt Burtz, writing for Downtown Key magazine, reported that pipes and electrical systems began malfunctioning mere days after their installation. But while unexplained phenomena were occurring all over the home, the strange activities were concentrated in a third floor bedroom, the site of Molly's death, in what is now Forepaugh's Sibley room. Inside, workers could not explain why they always felt a draft, even when the room's doors and windows were tightly shut. Even now, patrons and staff will wonder why the scent of perfume is so strong and why extinguished candles will reignite themselves even when the Sibley room is empty. Joan France, an employee at Forepaugh, who was interviewed by Burt's in 1999, heard a loud banging coming from behind a ground level storage closet, but when she opened it, she found herself staring at emptiness. Another time, she was applying lipstick in front of a first floor mirror when she heard a strange rattling coming from the coat room. She went into the room and realized the coat hangers were shaking and rattling loudly, even though she was the only person in the room. Over the 13 years France has worked in the restaurant, she had seen stacks of plates shake on their own and walk away from a set table only to return to it moments later to discover all the settings disturbed. Molly is still here in the restaurant that now bears the name of the man who abandoned her. Some customers request to sit in the Sibley room in the hopes of catching a glimpse of its permanent guest. For her part, Molly seems to bear the living no ill will. She has embraced her lot in the afterlife and seems to enjoy teasing patrons and staff to let them know that they are not alone. She must relish the irony that she is now the permanent inhabitant of a home she was asked so many years ago to leave.